You're standing in the control room of reactor number 4. It's the middle of the night, and right now, the building around you is tearing itself apart. Two explosions rip through the roof. A 2,000-ton steel lid, the cap that sits on top of the reactor, is hurled into the air and crashes back down sideways. Through the window, a column of fire climbs into the night sky, and inside that fire, invisible, is something that will make this ground unlivable for the next 20,000 years. 4 seconds earlier, you were standing at this exact panel, sure that everything was fine. It's 1:23 in the morning, April 26, 1986. You just pressed the button marked AZ5, the emergency shutdown, the one button in this entire building designed to make everything safe. Press it and the reactor stops. That's the rule. That's the whole point. For 4 seconds, nothing happens. And then the floor lifts under your feet. Nobody in this room knows what's coming next. Some of the men standing here are already dead. They just haven't felt it. This is the story of the worst nuclear accident in human history. But it isn't really about a machine breaking. It's about a lie. One so big, it may have helped bring down the Soviet Union itself. And it's a story that still isn't over. Because 40 years later, soldiers are fighting over this exact patch of poisoned dirt. Let's connect the dots. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what they were even trying to do. A nuclear plant has a terrifying weak point. The reactor is hot, insanely hot, and it needs water pumped through it constantly to cool it. Stop the water for even a couple of minutes, and the core starts to melt. So what happens if the power goes out? If the plant loses electricity, the pumps stop. There are backup diesel generators, but they take about a minute to spin up, and in that 1-minute gap, the reactor is on its own. The test was meant to solve that gap. The idea, when the turbine loses steam, it keeps spinning for a while on its own momentum. Could that dying spin generate just enough electricity to keep the pumps running for that one dangerous minute? That's it. That's the whole experiment. On paper, it's almost boring. But this reactor had a secret. It was a Soviet design called the RBMK. And the RBMK had a flaw the men in that room were never fully told about. In most reactors, if things heat up too much, the reaction naturally slows down. It's self-correcting. The RBMK was the opposite. Under certain conditions, low power, steam building in the core, heating up made the reaction speed up, which made it hotter, which made it faster, a loop that feeds itself. And there was one more thing. The control rods, the safety rods you drop in to stop the reaction, were tipped with graphite. For the first few seconds of insertion, they didn't slow the reactor. They briefly made it more powerful. Sit with that. The brake for the first moment was also an accelerator. Now the human part. The test kept getting delayed. A regional grid controller needed Chernobyl's power that evening, so the plan slid into the middle of the night and onto the shoulders of the night shift, men who hadn't planned to run it. In charge that night was the deputy chief engineer, Anatoly Dyatlov, experienced, respected, and impatient. At the panel sat a 25-year-old senior engineer named Leonid Toptunov, on the job just a few months. To run the test, they had to lower the reactor's power, but it dropped too far, almost to zero, and the core became unstable, sluggish, poisoned by its own gases. Every rule of good sense said, shut it down, stabilize, try tomorrow. Toptunov, the young man at the panel, warned him. The power's too low, he said. We should stop. Dyatlov's answer was final. Raise it, pull the rods, we finish the test tonight. To claw the power back up, the operators pulled out almost all the control rods, far more than the rules allowed. The reactor was now balanced on a knife's edge, and almost every safety brake had been taken out of the core. 1:23 and 4 seconds in the morning, they start the test. They close the steam to the turbine and let it coast. For a few seconds, it works. Then the reactor, unstable, stripped of its safeties, begins to heat. And the RBMK's hidden loop wakes up. Heat, power, heat, power. The numbers on the panel start climbing. Then they start climbing faster. At 23:40, the shift supervisor, Akimov, gives the order every engineer trusts with his life. Press AZ5, shut it down, now! All the control rods begin to drop at once, graphite tips first. And for those few seconds, the brake becomes the accelerator. In a reactor already running away, this is the last thing on Earth you want. Power that should have been a few hundred units spikes to an estimated 100 times the reactor's maximum. In under a second, the core tears itself apart. 2 explosions. The first, steam. The second, bigger. The 2,000-ton lid is flung upward and slams back down at an angle, leaving the core open to the sky. Chunks of burning radioactive graphite rain down across the roofs of the plant. Inside the control room, the men don't understand what they're seeing. The dials make no sense. Dyatlov insists the reactor is still intact, that they just need to pump water into it. But there is no reactor left to cool. It's open, burning in the open air. And here is the first quiet horror of that night. The men who were sent to check on the core walked toward it and looked directly into it. That look was fatal, and they didn't know it. In the plant, radiation isn't a sound or a smell, it's just the air. Down at the fire station, the alarm goes out. A roof fire at the power plant. Routine. The firefighters arrive in minutes, led by men like Vasily Ignatenko. They climb onto the roof to put out what they think are ordinary flames. Nobody tells them the black rubble they're standing on is reactor graphite. Nobody hands them protective gear, because as far as the official story goes, a reactor cannot explode. They save the plant. They stop the fire from spreading to Reactor 3 next door, which very likely saved thousands of lives. Most of the first men on that roof would be dead within weeks. Now the accident becomes something worse than an accident. Because the very first instinct of the Soviet system was not to warn people, it was to keep it quiet. 3 kilometers away sits the city of Pripyat, 49,000 people. A young city, average age around 26, built for the plant workers and their families. Cinemas, swimming pools, a brand new amusement park set to open in days. On the morning of April 26th, life in Pripyat just continues.
Parents send kids to school. People sunbathe. Some gather on a railway bridge to watch the pretty colored glow over the plant. That bridge would later get a grim nickname, the Bridge of Death. Meanwhile, radiation levels in the town are hundreds of times normal. The local officials know something is very wrong, but the message from Moscow is always the same. Do not cause panic. Everything is under control. For 36 hours, Pripyat is not evacuated. Children breathe it. Everyone breathes it. When the evacuation finally comes on April 27th, people are told it's temporary. Pack for 3 days, leave your pets, you'll be back soon. They were never coming back. Not in 3 days. Not ever. And now the Soviet Union makes a decision that will define the whole disaster. It says nothing to the world. But radiation doesn't respect borders. It rides the wind. And the wind is blowing north and west. Across Belarus, across the Baltic, towards Scandinavia.
2 days later, on April 28th, hundreds of kilometers away in Sweden, workers arriving at the Forsmark nuclear plant set off the radiation alarms. On their way in. Panic. Is our own reactor leaking? They test the dust on their clothes. The radioactive signature isn't Swedish. It's reactor fuel. And the wind is coming from the southeast. The Swedes do the math and point straight at the Soviet Union. This isn't ours, they say. This is yours. What did you do? And from Moscow, silence. Cornered, Moscow finally admits something happened. That evening, Soviet TV reads a statement so small it's almost an insult. A few sentences. An accident has occurred. Measures are being taken. No scale, no danger, no apology. And then comes the part people find hardest to believe. 5 days after the explosion, on May the 1st, the Soviet Union holds its May Day parades. In Kyiv, 90 kilometers downwind, children march through the streets with flowers and balloons under a radioactive sky, because canceling the parade would admit how bad it really was. Think about what that means. The state knew. and it chose the image of control over the safety of its own children. That choice, that instinct to protect the lie instead of the people, is the thing that would come back to destroy it. Because millions of Soviet citizens were about to learn something their government never wanted them to know, that it would lie to them even when their lives were on the line. The fire in the core is still burning, and it can't be allowed to burn. So the Soviet Union throws people at it, not machines, people. Over the following months, an estimated 600,000 men are pulled from across the empire and sent to Chernobyl. Soldiers, miners, firemen, ordinary conscripts. History remembers them by one name: the Liquidators.
Helicopters fly over the open core, dropping thousands of tons of sand, clay, lead, and boron to smother it. Flying through radiation so intense it's like standing next to the sun. Miners are sent to dig a tunnel underneath the reactor, terrified the molten core will burn down into the groundwater and poison the water of millions. They dig in temperatures so brutal that many work nearly naked in the most contaminated ground on the planet. And then there's the roof. Radioactive graphite has to be cleared off a rooftop by hand. The Soviets try robots. The radiation is so strong it fries the robots' circuits. They roll over and die. So they use men instead. They call them biorobots. Wrapped in homemade lead aprons, each man gets somewhere around 90 seconds on that roof. Run out, grab a chunk of graphite, hurl it into the hole, run back. 90 seconds and a lifetime's dose of radiation.
Over the reactor itself, they build a tomb, a hasty concrete and steel shell called the sarcophagus, thrown up in about 200 days to seal the ruined core away from the world. The human cost is impossible to pin down, and that's partly by design. The records were incomplete, and the truth was inconvenient. 2 men died the night of the explosion, 28 more from acute radiation sickness within weeks. Beyond that, estimates of the long-term dead range from 4,000 into the tens of thousands, depending on who's counting. One man understood the stakes better than anyone: Valery Legasov, the scientist who led the investigation and stood up in Vienna to tell the world, carefully, what happened. He also privately blamed the reactor's secret design flaws, not just the operators. 2 years to the day after the explosion, Legasov took his own life. Before he died, he recorded tapes about what really went wrong. After his death, the Soviets could no longer fully hide the RBMK's flaws, and they quietly modified every reactor of that type still running. Here's where the story gets bigger than one reactor, because Chernobyl didn't just poison a forest, it poisoned something the Soviet Union couldn't survive without: belief. For decades, the deal between the Soviet state and its people was simple. You don't get freedom, you don't get truth, but you get security. The system will protect you. The system knows best. Chernobyl tore that deal to pieces. Millions had watched their own government stay silent while the wind carried poison over their kids. They'd watched it run a parade over a radioactive city. The system didn't protect them, it lied to them. The Soviet leader at the time was Mikhail Gorbachev. He was already pushing reforms, glasnost, meaning openness. Chernobyl became the ultimate test of whether the state could actually tell the truth.
It failed that test in public, in front of the whole world. Years later, Gorbachev himself wrote that Chernobyl, perhaps more than anything else, was the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it lit a specific fuse in one specific place: Ukraine. The reactor was on Ukrainian soil. Ukrainians breathed the worst of it, buried their liquidators, and felt most sharply that Moscow had gambled with their lives and lost. Chernobyl became a rallying cry for a Ukrainian independence movement that had been simmering for generations. If Moscow will do this to us, hide this from us, why are we still ruled from Moscow at all? In 1991, the impossible happened. The Soviet Union, one of the 2 great superpowers on Earth, dissolved. No invasion, no world war. It came apart from the inside. And Ukraine walked out the door as an independent country, taking Chernobyl with it. A single reactor, a single lie, helped end an empire that spanned 11 time zones.
But the ground itself never healed. and that poisoned ground would become a fault line in a new war, one still being fought in our lifetime. Around the ruined reactor, the Soviets drew a circle 30 kilometers wide and emptied it of people, the Exclusion Zone, an area larger than some countries, sealed off from normal human life. It still exists today. Nature moved back in. Wolves, boar, wild horses, forests swallowing empty apartment blocks. Pripyat's amusement park, the one that never officially opened, still stands, its Ferris wheel frozen in place, one of the most haunting images on the planet. The old sarcophagus was crumbling, so the world built something new, a colossal steel arch called the New Safe Confinement, slid over the reactor and completed by 2019, the largest movable structure ever built on land, designed to contain the core for a century. For a while, Chernobyl became almost peaceful, a place for scientists and a trickle of tourists. History, sealed under steel. And then, on February 24th, 2022, the tanks came back. On the very first day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces pushed south out of Belarus, and their fastest road to Kyiv ran directly through the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Within hours, Russian troops seized the plant itself. Suddenly, the workers who monitor the world's most dangerous ruin were being held at gunpoint, running the site under armed occupation, some for weeks without proper rest. At one point, the plant even lost external power, the electricity that keeps the site's own safety systems alive. And then came a detail almost too reckless to believe. Russian soldiers reportedly dug trenches and fortifications in the Red Forest, the single most radioactively contaminated woodland on Earth, kicking up decades-old poison into the air they were breathing. Soldiers digging foxholes in ground that could kill them, apparently not understanding where they were. Russia pulled back from the zone by the end of March 2022, but Chernobyl was now, once again, a weapon on a map, a place where a stray shell or a lost war could reopen the wound of 1986. And it isn't hypothetical. In February 2025, a drone struck the New Safe Confinement, the very shield built to contain the core, punching through the outer skin and starting a fire on the structure meant to protect all of us. The thing built to hold the disaster in for 100 years was hit in under 10. That's why Chernobyl is never just history. It's a physical piece of the Soviet collapse that Ukraine inherited and Russia keeps reaching for. The lie ended one empire. The ground it left behind is still contested by the next one. In 1986, a handful of men pressed a button that was supposed to make everything safe, and instead exposed the one thing the Soviet Union could never survive: the truth about itself. A reactor can be sealed in steel. A lie can't. And 40 years on, the world is still living inside the fallout of both. If you want to see how one hidden decision brought down a superpower, watch how a single coup did the same thing to Iran. That video's on screen now. Subscribe, and let's keep connecting the dots.